Alicia, I can't hear you now.
No, I didn't. So good
Okay.
morning and welcome to the PHFA Certificate in Elder Service Coordination Program. Today's topic is assessment of an older person, and these webinars in conjunction with specified sessions at the PHFA Housing Services Conference will enable you to be eligible to receive a Certificate in Elder Service Coordination, which will be issued in partnership with PHFA and the California University of Pennsylvania Rural Communities Institute. While we encourage you to ask questions during the webinar, your questions should be general in nature, and we do have an interactive section in here. If you have site or specific case questions, you're welcome to contact the presenter or any PHFA Housing Services representative after the webinar. We will try best to answer all the questions, but due to time constraint, we may be unable to. Please feel free to contact the speaker or any PHFA Housing Services representative after the webinar with any unanswered questions. The presenter's contact information will be provided at the end of the presentation. And now I'd like to do the introduction for our presenter this morning. Our presenter is Dr. Janet Ann Melnick. Dr. Melnick holds a PhD in Human Development with a specialization in social work. Prior to working on her doctorate, she was in clinical practice and administration in local agencies that specialize in work with the elderly for over 30 years. Dr. Melnick was the original supervisor of the Protective Service Unit for the Lackawanna County Area Agency on Aging. After leaving the AAA, Dr. Melnick was the Director of Rehabilitation Services for Telspon Senior Services. In that capacity, she was responsible for the administration of 2 adult day services facilities, a coordinated outpatient rehabilitation facility, in-home respite services, and family caregiver services. Dr. Melnick was one of the original grantees for Robert Wood Johnson Dementia Care and Respite Services Project. After the end of that grant demonstrated project, she was invited to become a consultant for the RWJ Foundation Partners in Caregiving program, which funded and mentored adult daycare program across the country. Dr. Melnick was the assistant coordinator of the social work field program at Marywood University prior to moving to Penn State. She has been a faculty member in Human Development and Family Studies, HDFS, at the Pennsylvania State University, Worthington-Scranton since 2000. She is a senior instructor and also the program coordinator and field coordinator for the HDFS and psychology programs of the Worthington-Scranton campus. Her primary teaching responsibility is in the gerontology and the internship components of the program. Dr. Melnick's research has been predominantly in the area of rural home and community-based services to the elderly. She has been the primary investigator for 2 grants from the Center of the Rural PA in this area of research. And thank you very much, Janet, for joining us. And
thank you. I'm happy to do this, and I find that as I tell my students when they're doing their resumes, you just get a longer resume as you get older. So that's not so good, I guess, but I'm happy to be here. So I'm going to get started, and just confirmation, Alicia, you can hear me, so everybody can hear me, yes?
Absolutely, and our audience is saying that they can hear us.
Okay. So I want this to be interactive. There's nothing more boring than, especially when you are not even seeing who the presenter is, but just staring at a computer screen at a PowerPoint and having me drone on at you for an hour and a half, hour and 15 minutes. So I want to encourage you to be interactive, and in that vein, to get started, you're going to be typing in your questions, your responses, and Alicia will be asking them to me. So let me just get a little bit of a sense of who my audience is this morning. How many years have you worked with either in housing or in aging services? Can you just give Alicia a little bit of information so I have an idea of who you are?
Well, we have quite a few respondents. We have one at 19 years, 11 months. Good. Seems to be our, yeah, so we're I'm looking at the, and we have 25 years also.
Wow.
Probably the
Great.
median for this group is probably around 4 to 5 years, although we have one that's been working in aging services for 35. So we kind of run the gamut, but the majority, I would say, is probably at the 5 to 6 years.
Good. Okay, great. So some of the information that I'm going to give you today, you may know, but maybe in a different way. We all do assessment. We do assessment when you decide what car to buy, what toothpaste to buy, where you want to go to dinner. You are constantly assessing things. So this is something that we all do, and now we just want to professionalize it a little bit. So here we go. The session goals. And we're going to use a lot of fancy big words, and I'm going to break all of those down so that they are usable for you, as I would for my students in any classes. So here's our goals for today. And then you can let me know at the end whether you think we've met those or not. Defining the biopsychosocial assessment in the context of an older person's functional abilities and environment. Develop an awareness to the value of the biopsychosocial assessment, and I challenge anyone to say biopsychosocial 3 times fast. Increase the competency in the evaluation process as it pertains to conditions that are not part of the normal aging process. And that's really important to me because as we go through this, we'll talk about what's normal aging and what's abnormal aging, because society as a whole still sees aging and some of the things that are not should not be part of the aging process as normal. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Analyzing the value of the strengths perspective. And this is one of the hardest things that I think people have the ability to do, is look at things from a strengths perspective. I know it's very difficult for students when they're just getting started. And understanding that the biopsychosocial assessment is a dynamic process. So that means it's changing, it's constantly flowing. And you all know, whether you've been working in this area for a short period of time or for those 35 years, when you work with your residents, you have to know them, and you know that everything is in flux. One day they're fine, the next day they're not. So we'll talk about how that plays out for you in your role. Okay, some key terms: assessment, biopsychosocial assessment, activities of daily living, ADLs, instrumental activities of daily living, IADLs, strengths perspective, aging, and functional assessment, which is different from assessment. So to get started with assessment, before I flip to the next screen, can you just really briefly let me know what you think is part of the assessment process?
Do you have any tools for them? We provide an assessment piece of paper. So to say, do you have one that, like at Penn State, that you have that to use?
No, and I'm really talking here in general about assessment, what they might feel assessment is. We're going to talk about mini mental assessments and so forth, and the aging office certainly has a very long assessment that probably all of you have worked with at some time in the past, at least been on the receiving end of answering maybe some of those questions for them. But in general, what does assessment mean? Any ideas?
Gathering information.
Yep. Absolutely. Any other ideas? Be not afraid. There's no right or wrong answers here.
Finding someone's baseline.
Okay, so by that I'm assuming you mean what is quote-unquote normal and what's not normal for them. Very good.
Identifying supports.
Absolutely. Great. Anything else? Well, all of those are really good, and that's something they're going to be incorporated in what. Go ahead.
Yeah, Dana, we have quite a few now. Looking for patterns and knowing when someone deviates from them.
Great.
ADLs and IADLs with family, and physical and emotional status.
Yes, absolutely. So, and that's really good. I'm really happy to hear that someone put emotional status too, because it's not just about the physical, what's happening, but we're going to talk about from a mental health perspective, as well as the emotional and financial perspectives as well. So this is great, and I think all of you probably are pretty good at this assessment piece, and so hopefully we'll have a lively discussion as we move forward with this. All right,
I'm sorry,
so assessment.
Janet, but I don't have your PowerPoint. Yeah, the PowerPoint went off, so I'm not quite sure.
Okay, I'm going to minimize it because I can see it. So, all right, let me minimize and let's see. So right now you should see a cat. That's my cat.
Yeah,
let's see.
Yes, we're almost there. Yes.
Okay. Now do you see it?
Not yet. It's
okay.
loading.
Okay. As long as it's loading.
Here we go. Now we have the case study.
Okay, great. So we're back up because you don't want to look, although my cat is cute, you don't want to look at that for the next hour. Okay, so let's talk, and I thought what we would do is try to frame this within the context of a case study, a case vignette, so that it would make it more interesting, and we'll keep going back to this case vignette. So this is a compilation of a lot of clients that I've worked with, and this may be very familiar to you. So Mary is an 82-year-old female that has been a resident in the elderly high-rise. The two have managed for 5 years. She has developed a number of friendships at the high-rise. She has always been pleasant when approached. Lately, however, you notice that she is more reclusive than normal. She appears more unkempt than usual and may be slightly confused. You are not sure if Mary has any family who live in the area. Her apartment is okay, but you believe that she might benefit from some help. It's not up to your living standards. When you ask her if she denies it and gets angry. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I got up on my phone here. When you ask her if anything's wrong, she denies it and gets angry. She tells you to mind your own business. What do you do? So let's brainstorm for a minute here, and let's talk about some of the things that you think you should start with Mary. So any thoughts?
So in other words, if this was a resident at their building, which I am sure that they have actually faced this scenario, what is it that they would do first?
Right.
I believe this is the part where we want them to give suggestions.
Yes, if you have any. We'll wait just a few more minutes and then we'll get going.
Start with the family.
Okay. So trying to find family, is that?
Reaching out to the family, check with relatives to investigate new changes. Someone said they would ask how things are going instead of what is wrong. It could, saying it that way can make her defensive and unwilling to share. Right.
And also, when we talk about the strengths perspective, that really taps into the strengths rather than just looking at any deficits that might be going on too. Okay, great. So one of the most important things that I think can happen in your relationship with your residents and with any clients, even when I was out doing casework, is to get to know the person that you are working with, to get to know that resident, to get to know that client. And this is really important, and someone said it before when we were talking about assessment. we need to know what normal looks like for these individuals, because what's normal for us may not be their normal based upon their own functioning level. And this is true no matter what age client that you're working with. So the first thing that we would start out by trying to ask is, what was Mary's normal like? Hopefully we've known Mary and we've developed some relationship with her, as I said in the vignette, but we would want to say, what was her general health status before? Do we know what kind of medications that she's on? And how has that maybe changed for her? The other things we might ask are, and this is what is important to kind of prioritize for our clients, for our residents, is what are the immediate concerns? One of the things that you always want to ask is there an immediate danger? Is something going to happen to Mary or another client that you're working with that is going to be life-threatening? And if that's the case, then you take different steps than, I have a concern about Mary. So we want to know, is she in any immediate danger? Or does she pose an immediate risk to other residents? Then kind of all bets are off. You might be calling 911. You might be calling in your area the mental health delegate, and that would be the person who would be deciding from the information you would be giving them whether Mary had a mental health issue, whether Mary needed a psychiatric assessment or some other intervention. Or you may immediately be calling the aging office into their protective service unit because you are worried that Mary is going to be a danger to either herself or to someone else. So that's our first concern. And then we need to look at, once we assess that, then we need to look at what are the long-term concerns. And probably one of the things that you're going to be looking at is longevity in your residences. How long can Mary stay there? Does she need a different type or level of care? So those are the things that we would start looking at almost immediately. So let me ask you, how do you engage Mary? So Mary's been pleasant before, but she's more reclusive now. She may not be as willing to talk to you. So we have some suggestions, but how do you start engaging Mary? We'll give you some of responses to Alicia, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that. Any thoughts?
Well, I know when I was, there you go. I was actually going to say this. One of our participants said that they might ask other residents that are close to her.
Yeah, very, very good idea. Very good idea. You don't want to facilitate gossip, and you might have residents that come up to you and say, hey, Mary is not doing well. But you could ask other folks. The other thing is just, and again, goes back to knowing your residents. One of the most important things you can do is start developing resident relationships with these folks as soon as they come in to your facilities. And so, because this way you have developed that. And to say, Mary, come on, let's have a cup of tea. How are things going for you? And just asking Mary what is happening with her. And that probably would be the best place to start.
And we have some other suggestions.
Okay.
You tell her that you're concerned for her well-being. Vary approaches to see what works and what triggers her behavior. Ask if she'd like to participate in activities that are coming up. If she would like any assistance with like cleaning or meals or any of those things.
Yeah, and this is a very delicate balance because people are usually afraid. They know when they might be losing functioning, and for the elderly sometimes it's very important to hide that because they're afraid of losing where they may live or of being placed in a nursing facility. So we do need to approach it pretty delicately. But asking, I think by asking Mary, how are things going? And if she says, fine, there's no problems, then we might need to do some other things and to keep watch over this. But we'll talk about that again a little bit later. So when we talk about assessment, we're really talking about any kind of evaluation. From a professional level, we're really looking at it from a multifunctional. We want to look at cognitive functioning, medical history, and then functioning level. So, and this is really important, is the functioning level. We can have folks who can be pretty impaired from a medical standpoint or sometimes even a cognitive standpoint, but functionally they're okay. And that, when I was doing protective services, that's one of the first things that we looked was what was the functioning level. So their activities of daily living, their basic skills. Are they able to bathe, dress, cook for themselves? If they can't do any of those, can we get services in to help with that? Their IADL, secondary daily activities, that would be grocery shopping, cleaning, paying bills. Again, there could be some help with that, but how are they doing independently with that? Socially, we had someone that said, you know, talk to their friends. One of the things that you can find out is, are they still engaging? Do they have friends? You might notice, and their friends might come to you and say, you know, in a case like Mary, gee, she's becoming more withdrawn. She used to always go on bus trips with us or come down and play cards with us, and she's not doing that anymore. So we want to look at socially, how are they functioning? And then the psychological piece. And this is really more about mental wellness, which is different from dementia or mental illness per se. We want to find out how they seem to be doing. So you can ask, we're not going to be diagnosing people here, but just an overall general, how are they functioning in terms of their mental wellness? Okay, so we have to be careful that we're not trying to diagnose people or make assumptions about people as we do this. So let's talk a little bit about the biopsychosocial assessment. And again, what is that? First of all, we want to do this and look at this, what we call cultural competency. We all have a tendency to look at the world as if our lens, how we see things, is the norm. So how we look at the world, how we interact with the world, how we manage customs, how clean we keep our home, and so forth, that we see this as being, well, we're normal, and we judge everybody else on that standard. It's very difficult to move yourself out of this sometimes. This is just normal human behavior. This is how we judge everything in our lives. But we want to, when we're doing an assessment of someone, we want to not look at it only through our own cultural or racial or ethnic perspectives, but we need to try to look at it from theirs. So you need to start by looking at what is the culture, the race, the gender and sexual orientation of the individual. So what is their norm? What is their culture saying is their normal? And we have to remember that all elderly are not the same. And when I'm working with my students, most are very young, I think that we paint the elderly with one brush. We tend to think of the elderly as being a very homogeneous group, that everybody is the same. And what we do know is that the elderly are no different than they were when they were 20 years old. It is a very diverse group of people. So all elderly are not the same, and that's one thing that I would caution anybody that's working with the elderly, is not to look at them as being all the same and having the same thoughts, feelings, and standards. So we'll start with the cultural competency piece. The biosocial assessment, really we're looking at assessing the total person and not just assessing the person by one of these means. So we're looking at the medical and the physical, that's the bio piece. We're looking at cognitive and mental functioning, that's the psycho piece. And we're looking at the social environment of the person. And I can tell you as a social worker, all of those are really important. And one of the things that we would really concentrate on is that last piece, that social environment, because we all know that people need interactions. And the elderly, they're what we call their social convoy. We all have one, our friends, our relatives, who we interact with. That shrinks as we age, as friends die, as spouse may die. So we want to see what's happening with their social convoy and what's happening from a social perspective as well. So looking at the biological, and this is where I would always start, no matter what age client I would be working with, is to find out what the health status of the individual. When we notice especially a big change in the behavior of people, we have to ask what's going on with that person from a medical and a health perspective. We want to know kind of what was the past and present medical conditions and health problems, so we can see if there's perhaps a change in that. You also want to look, if you were doing a formalized assessment, at the family history for medical and health problems. So what we do know is that things run in families. There is some dementia that may be genetically linked. So we would look to see if that person would be developing some of those issues as well. The other thing we want to look at is medications. And medications, as you know from all of your residents, if you go into their apartments, they have a ton of medications. My husband and I know we're getting older now because we open up one of our kitchen cabinets and all you see are bottles and pills of either over-the-counter or vitamins and then prescribed medications. What can happen with medications is that someone can be on them for years. I'm sorry, Alicia?
Did you want to change to the next slide? We're on this brainstorming side. It's confusing people.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm already on the biological site.
Right, but we're seeing the brainstorming.
So you're still seeing that?
Yes.
Is it changing now? Because I've moved quite away from that.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, we're on the brainstorming one.
Yeah, that's not what I'm on, but do you see my cat now?
No, we still see the brainstorming.
Okay, so it's saying screen sharing has stopped, and I'm not sure why.
It doesn't like the weather.
It might not.
So everyone just hang tight. Just a little bump on the road.
Okay, so we've got, it's kind of logging me off here, I think, unfortunately. Let's see. All right. Back to the right page.
Someone's upset that they don't even see your cat.
Well, they won't see that now. Let's see. It says it's going to start screen sharing again.
Okay.
So let's see if that comes up. I see on the side here, no meow. So yeah, sorry about that.
Now we're on biological.
Okay. So do you see psychological now?
We do.
All right, let me get back to where I was. Okay, so I think I was talking about the medications. Okay, so you see psychological. So sorry about that. Let Alicia know, because I was moving along here, and you were not moving along with me. So we see the psychological now, right?
I just figured you got so into it that you forgot to change the slide.
No,
so
no.
Okay.
Nope, I was moving along here. So if it gets stuck again, just let me know and we'll go and do. I think it keeps logging me off of the screen sharing for some reason. Okay, so back on track here. the psychological aspect. So what we want to look at here is thoughts, feelings, emotions, behaviors. So is the person's thought process still on a normal trajectory? Are things getting askew? Are they becoming, one of the things we look at as kind of a sign that dementia is happening, and I say dementia, not Alzheimer's disease, because most of you all know there's about over 200 different classifications of dementia, and Alzheimer's disease is only one of those, although probably the best known. But one of the things that we look at when we're assessing for that is paranoia. As people start to lose functioning, they try to cover that up, and there can also be some actual mental health issues with the paranoia. Think about it. If you start to have loss of memory, you cannot remember where you put your glasses, where you may put something else. So people start to think that somebody is doing something to them. So paranoia is one of those thought processes that we would be looking at. And then behaviors. Has their behavior changed? It's hard at the beginning if someone is in the throes of the beginning part of dementia, as you probably know, because we are social beings and we cover things up pretty well. So, for instance, I have a lot of past students, but I may not always recall their names. So if my husband and I are out and a former student comes up to me, I always tell my husband, if I'm not introducing you right away and saying, hi, this is Jill, this is my husband, I tell my husband, stick out your hand and say, hi, I'm John, and then that person will say their name, and then that will jog my memory. So that's a little social behavior that I have to jog my own memory, and we all have those things. So people can cover up deficits for quite a long time just by the social behaviors. So that's just an FYI and something you've probably run into yourself. Okay, Alicia, we're on the next slide. See it? Yes?
Social, yes.
Social? Good. All right, good. So then we also want to know what is happening in their social environment. As someone said before, family. This is, in the vignette I said we're not really sure what Mary's family is. This is another area to get to know your residents early on to see, what family they might have in the area. Who are their friends, who comes to visit them, who does things for them, because they would be the first point of contact if we know who they are. What are their cultural beliefs? What kinds of things do they do from their own ethnic or racial cultural aspects? Do they continue to work or have volunteer activities? And what are their leisure time activities? And one of the things we look at socially is, are people becoming more socially withdrawn? Are they not doing the volunteer activities? Are they not participating in their leisure activities? So again, this is part of the assessment process. Economic assessment, and I've moved on again, and hopefully you can see the next slide. We'd also look at how they are functioning from a financial perspective. How much is their income? And you probably have that on record when they come into your facilities. How many depend upon that income, and are they receiving all that they may be entitled to? Usually, and you probably know this as well, you meet with resistance. People don't talk about their finances in our culture. That's something that we hold that very close to us, and it's very personal. So getting people to open up about what they may have and what they may need may take some doing for most work with the elderly. Okay, functional assessment, and I'm moving on here. And this is, again, what I mentioned before is we can have deficits in all of those other areas. And for the most part, even younger people have some deficits in some of those areas. You're younger, I have arthritis, but it's a deficit, but it doesn't stop me from functioning at a normal level. So we want to ask that big piece. Can they function? And can they function independently with assistance? And what kind of assistance do they need to be able to continue to function independently? And as someone grows older, that assistance will increase and then it will get to the point where they no longer can be maintained maybe safely in a community setting and may need other kinds of assistance. But if you have a husband and wife, usually what we find is those folks are going to be able to be maintained much longer, usually, in the community than someone who is alone or widowed or has never been married and has no one else to kind of help with them. So we want to ask, can they take care of themselves, and are they going to be in danger? And that's probably one of the most crucial things. Again, having done protective services, that's what we were looking at. Number one, is this person in danger if we leave them in their current environment? We can't make any assumptions or judgments. We really need to get in there and find out what is happening with the person, how they're functioning. Again, can they bathe themselves? Can they dress themselves? Feed? Is there incontinence issues with them? Their grooming, their toileting, and transferring. So transferring, being able to get up and be mobile, or being able to transfer from a bed to a commode. Those types of things we would be looking at. And then the IADLs. And this usually, most IADLs can really be supplemented with assistance. And as persons grow older, they usually need more help with this. Another big piece of the functional assessment is nutrition. Are they getting the correct amount of calories and good solid food? For the elderly, as they age, one of the things that we worry about is a drop in weight. We spend all of our lives trying to make sure we lose weight, but in the elderly, we would watch and we would say it's abnormal to have a rapid weight loss. So we would want to make sure that their nutrition is being maintained. And then again, the medical history of that person and what is kind of their normal. What they may have lived for years with chronic conditions, chronic heart conditions, arthritis, maybe vision problems as well. And that might just be their normal. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. So why do we use all of this? We really want to do a holistic assessment of the person. We want to move away from a disease model. And that's really how the general public sees the elderly in many cases, in that it's only looking at what they can't do or what diseases they have. So we want to see the whole person. We want to see how they function, and we're not looking at just one aspect of the person. We do this so we can see the person and not just the symptoms or the problem areas. Because none of us want to be looked at as just a compilation of the things that we can't do or our medical histories. We want to be seen as the total person and how we function. So we say that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, which means that we are really looking, again, not just at what they can't do, but as the whole person. And then this integrates into the entire person to explain behaviors in ways that account for how these different types of behavior processes combine or influence a type of behavior. So what we're talking about is looking at what the person is able to do and then how that may change in terms of any kind of behavioral change that we have. Okay? And if you have questions at any time, type those in and Alicia will let me know. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about aging. And again, we tend to paint aging as just part of a loss. The problem with aging, when we talk about it from an academic perspective, is that it's really easy to talk about developmental milestones and markers for children. We know that they need to walk by a certain age and talk by a certain age and be potty trained by a certain age. And even in adolescence, we expect more independence as that individual moves out of adolescence into young adulthood. But once we reach adulthood, we still do have markers developmental markers, but it's not the same in every person. So not everyone goes to college or even at all, or may not go right after high school. We have different career paths. We may start and stop careers. We may never get into a partnered relationship. We may have multiple partnered relationships throughout our lifespan. So the aging process is very fluid. What the biopsychosocial model looks at is we're looking for kind of that true person without negative or overlaying positive connotations. So when we think about older adults, we either see aging and older adults as either being frail, sick, and depressed, so nothing good, or we see them as being wise. So we either put them up on a pedestal or we only see the negative aspects of the aging person and in general. Reality is usually somewhere in between that. Everyone has positives and negatives. So we don't want to see aging as just a series of losses, just a series of disability, sickness, and depression. We want to see aging and people who age as being able to overcome some of those, and we all adapt to all of the things that happen to us throughout our lifespan. Okay? Excuse me. We want to see the biopsychosocial assessment is really it's a dynamic process because aging is a dynamic process, so it's not going to stay static. You can't do an assessment of someone 1 year and say that is it. We don't ever have to do an assessment again. People change, so our assessment has to change, and we constantly have to update what we're doing and looking at that person.
Janet, we do have a comment from someone that
Sure.
They say the baby boomer impact on aging care and et cetera will change perception and care approaches.
Yes, absolutely. We have seen that. All you have to do, and what I tell my students is all you have to do to notice how baby boomers are changing is to watch the commercials that are directed at that population. So before, when we talk about incontinence or we talk about the elderly, you'd see them as being frail or sitting down or needing a lot of help. Look at the commercials, even for incontinence products. What we see are people that are active on motorcycles, out there doing things. So we're very true. We're seeing a big change in how we look at the elderly. We're not totally there yet, though. And the reason I know we're not is because when I ask my young students how they see the elderly, and usually what I get from them is the negative connotations. They don't see anything that's positive in the aging process until I prod them a little bit. But hopefully we are changing, and I think Madison Avenue is probably changing faster than society is changing, but our thought processes are going to change as well, because certainly the baby boomers are changing how we look at aging as they become much more active. So that was a very good comment. So going back to Mary, go ahead.
Well, also for me, you know, it's kind of like when you're in your 20s, you think, you know, 35 is old, and you hit 30, and well, you know, 50 is not looking so bad. So, you know, I'm in my late 40s, and you know, 65 it's still looking young, and so our perception, you know, changes with that. Is kind of interesting because your students, you know, will change with that. If you ask them, you know, 20 years from now, what they think about the aging process, it'd probably be different than their answer today.
Yeah, absolutely. It changes for all of us. And what I always tell students is that as we go through life, when you are 4 years old and someone asks how old you are, you say, I'm 4.5, I'm almost 5. When you are, you know, getting to driving age, I'm 15 3/4, I'll be 16 soon. Getting to being able to be legally drink, I'm almost 21, or I'm 20 3/4. And we do that until we hit after our 21, and then when you hear people talk about being 30, they'll say, well, I'm still 29. I'll be 30 next week, but I'm still 29 right now. Until you get back, so we tend to deny age until we get back on that trajectory into that older age, and then you have people who are 85, and they'll say, well, I'm almost 86, so then we've become proud of our aging process again. So it's kind of funny when we look at it from that perspective. Looking at what this means for Mary, and hopefully you see that slide right now, yes?
Yep.
Good. So we want to ask, is there any changes from the biological perspective in functional ability? Is Mary's ability to maintain and do activities of daily living and IADLs, has that changed at all? Is there a health condition or a mental illness? So we'd want to assess from that perspective. Then we want to look at the psychological in terms of what's happening with Mary's cognitive functioning level. We're going to look for changes in memory, patterns of speech, relationship to reality. So what we usually talk about that is orientation times 3. So we're looking, is Mary oriented in terms of the time, the place, and the person? And we'll talk about doing that assessment in a way that's not scary for people in a second.
All right, and we do have a question.
Go ahead.
Not sure quite how that this fits in, but it's a good question. What about spiritual assessment? So if I'm, we're mostly dealing with physical and mental, but there is also a spiritual side of it that you could be dealing with residents.
Yes, absolutely. Kind of in the professional world, we have, in many cases, we avoid that spiritual area. I found with my work with aging individuals, especially as we get to end of life, that becomes really important and to talk about what they believe in and what it helps them deal with dying and death issues as well. But most of the time when we're doing functional assessments, that can be part of the social piece to ask about that, depending on how comfortable that you are and if that person is spiritual or not. So that can be part of the assessment as well. Usually not what we're looking to do most of the time when we're trying to assess for functionality, though. But a very good part of it and a very good question, so thank you very much. I wanted to talk a little bit about a mini mental status exam. Most of you probably have heard about this, and my disclaimer here that it's kind of for educational purposes only, and you shouldn't attempt to do a mini mental. A true mini mental, and I've done tons and probably thousands of these when we're trying to, from a professional level, assess decompensation, especially when I ran adult daycare programs. And the reason that I put the caution up there is you can ask some of these questions through the course of a normal conversation to get an idea if that person maybe is slipping a little bit. But you have to approach this very carefully. Again, none of us like to be quizzed, especially if we know ourselves that we have some deficits. And it can make people very defensive, and it can ruin your relationship with those residents. So it's really here for instructional purposes. If someone comes out from the Area Agency on Aging, they might do a very short mini mental status exam. Certainly if we have someone that's being evaluated clinically by their doctor or in a GERO assessment process, the mini mental is really going to give us a good idea of their functioning level. In adult daycare, when I ran adult daycare, we did mini mental status exams about every 6 months with folks, and again, approaching it very cautiously and not, some of us are not good test takers, and even there might be some residual effects of having to take a test from when we were younger and hating to do that. And so we would approach this very carefully with folks in some of those things. Okay. Looking at the mini mental, usually a quick and simple way to quantify cognitive functioning and screen for cognitive loss. So we might assess here, we're going to assess orientation again to time, place, and memory recall. We're testing the individual's orientation, attention, how their ability to do some calculations, and I'll tell you, I always have a hard part of this, and I don't have any cognitive impairment. Their ability to recall, language ability, and motor skills. All of those things go into looking at a person in terms of dementia as well, because when we have someone who is in the beginning stages of Alzheimer's or another dementia, we're going to have problems in all of those areas. Okay? Word finding would be the language issue that we'd be looking at. Usually we see that first. And again, care must be taken when we are administering the mini mental status exam. Okay, so looking at what is in the assessment, we have an orientation to time, what is today's date, what is the month, what is the year, what day of the week is today, and what season is that. So usually those questions can be worked into a normal conversation. So you don't want to be badgering the person and kind of, you know, Mary, tell me what today's date is and what's the month and those types of things. When we look at orientation to place, we might ask, whose home is this? What room are we in? What city are we in? What country? What state? We also looking for items in the assessment, immediate recall. So you can kind of play along as we're doing this. So you might say, or you might show people some objects, like saying things. This is, I'm going to give you 3 words, ball, flag, and tree. And you'd wait about a second before you would, in between each word. After you said them, you ask the person to repeat them. And then you will tell them that later on, I'm going to ask you what they were. So you want to see if they can repeat them after you. Someone in pretty advanced Alzheimer's disease, even if they're still socially adept, they're not going to be able to repeat those words even right after you say that to them. Attention, we want to begin with 100 and count backwards by 7, and this is the one that I have to use my fingers on. And usually you stop after 5 subtractions and see if the people are able to do that. Another thing we usually ask is spelling world backwards, okay? And we're scoring these things as we go along, so we want to get make sure they put the letters in the correct position. Other parts of a mini mental are, again, asking them to go back and say, I gave you those 3 words before. Can you remember what they were and tell me what they are? You may show the individual common things, a pen, a pencil, a wristwatch, and ask them, you know, what is this? So you might say, here's a wristwatch, here's a pencil, and see if they know. People who have dementia usually will know what it's for. Oh, that's that thing that you write with, but they might not be able to find the word for pencil. Repetition, asking the individuals to repeat the following. No ifs, ands, or buts. So that's an easy phrase for us, but someone who has some cognitive impairment will not be able to get the order of those words correctly. 3-stage commands. Go ahead. Alicia, was there a question?
Oh, no, no question.
Okay. And you're still seeing we're moving along here.
Mini mental, well, we're on the mini mental status exam.
Right. And the current slide should say items in the assessment. Yes?
No.
Okay. So you don't see the 3-stage command?
No, it has, for education, it has the disclaimer. I think it's the first one.
Okay, so we've lost it again. Okay, let's see where we're at.
I'm not quite sure why it keeps it's freezing.
Not sure. Has it moved up now?
No.
Okay. We need a tech person right here. It's still telling me screen sharing is currently used. Okay. I'm not sure how to fix that.
Well, like you did the last time, did you just close it out and then just start it back up?
Yeah, I'm going to try that again. Let's see. Don't want to end the meeting, but...
No, don't end the meeting.
Yeah. It's telling me that someone else is using it, which that someone else is probably me. Nothing yet, still on that one screen?
Yeah, it's still on slide 22.
All right, I'm already on 26 here, so I apologize to everyone. At least it's not letting me. Again, I don't want to click off of anything so we don't have any issues here. Maybe I can just go through and so we can finish on time and just talk, and then the PowerPoint can be shared later with folks. Would that work?
Oh yeah, I mean I can change it to a PDF. I mean, unless you want to stop the screen sharing and then just I guess refresh the PowerPoint. I don't know.
Yeah, I keep trying to do that. It just tells me it's starting screen sharing, and then when I click on it, it says someone else is also using it. So I think that
Which is you.
which is me. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will share.
Yeah, maybe we can get the PowerPoint, and I apologize to everyone for the technical issues. But please do ask questions, and I'll try to read the slides a little bit more. I'm up to giving that 3-stage command and what I was talking about. It says give the individual a plain piece of paper and say, take the paper in your hand, fold it in half, and put it on the floor. Folks with dementia cannot follow 3-stage commands. When I worked with care providers, and I still do some training for them, one of the things that I talk about quite a lot is that if you have someone with dementia, you cannot give them more than one command at a time. So someone with dementia, if you gave them this command, take the paper in your hand, fold it in half, put it on the floor, they would not be able to do that. They would get totally confused. Someone with dementia, if I wanted them to do this, I would say, take the paper in your hand and probably have to repeat it a number of times. Fold it in half would be the next after they were able to take it, and then put it on the floor, but not all at once. Reading, hold up the card, reading, close your eyes so the individual can see it clearly, and then ask them to read what it says and to do what it says. So you have a piece of paper with a very large print that says close your eyes. So you ask them to hold that up to where they can see it, and then you would ask them to read it out loud and do what it says. So here they might be able to read it, and they may not be able to follow through and actually close their eyes. So there's a 2 kind of step thing in terms of the reading. Writing, give the individual a piece of paper and ask him or her to write a sentence. And it can be anything written spontaneously, but it's got to make sense. It's got to have a subject and verb and be sensible. So you'd want to see if they can put it to a complete sentence together. And then copying, and since you're not able to see the screen, but you'd have like two trapezoids and or intersecting one another, or two boxes. You know, you learn how to draw a box when you're a small child by doing two squares and then the connecting lines. And you'd ask them to copy that. Someone with any kind of impairment is not going to be able to copy a simple figure like that. So those are the items in a mini mental. And again, not that you'd want to go into your residence and do all of that, but you can work some of this into conversation by saying, gee, Mary, do you know what time it is now? And see if they either have a look at a clock or have a watch on, or are able to kind of do the steps that someone who is fully functioning would be able to do in order to get the time. Okay. All right, so social assessment as it pertains to Mary. What we would want to go back and look at are, what are her social supports? What friends does she have? What family does she have? And yes, on this slide that you cannot see, but it says spiritual activities, as the other person mentioned earlier. Do they go to church, synagogue, mosque, whatever their spiritual activities are? Volunteer activities, leisure time activities, and financial. What happens with the elderly, as you well know, as they become more impaired, their social circle is going to continue to shrink. They may not be able to get out to activities, to volunteer spiritual activities or leisure time activities. But we want to find out what was normal for Mary and what has now changed. Okay. Normal versus abnormal aging. We talk about aging as being stable and also changing. Can you give me any examples of how aging is stable and how we change as we age? I'll give you a couple minutes to do that while I try again to get the right screen up for you. Alicia, anybody giving any thoughts?
If personal relationships are stable, like
okay,
like an aging spouse, etc.
Okay, so that could be one part of aging that's stable, but we can also have change in that area too. Any other thoughts at all? How as we age we stay stable, and what changes for us as we age? And probably the changes part is, go ahead.
Yeah, someone put gray hair, gaining weight.
Yep, those are, the change parts are easy to see. So we change as we age. So we start out as a baby and we develop and we move through life and we grow. And then we have changes as we get older. So we get gray hair, we may get wrinkled, we have health problems. So that's the change part of it. When we talk about aging from an academic perspective, there's also stability. For the most part, our personalities do not change.
And that's exactly what one of our attendees put: personality stays stable.
Right. We can do things to help change our personality if we go through any kind of, if you are a real introvert and you want to become more extroverted. But even those of us who are introverts and now have to do extroverted things, we still may have some anxiety about being in public places, even though we do it because we're forced to do it for our careers. So usually personality, what we say is that stays pretty stable across the lifespan. But we change in other ways, and most of those changes will be cognitive and physical changes. But we can grow in both of those areas as well. We also talk about the journey. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, one last thought on this was that sometimes when you age, your home location may change. You may be unable to live alone and may be forced to move in with family.
Right. Yes. Certainly our social life changes a lot. So we start out as dependent. We become independent, especially in Western cultures, which is not necessarily true in some other cultures, again, looking at it from a cultural competency perspective. But in Western cultures, our whole childhood is our parents helping us to become independent adults. And then as we move through adulthood, we have children of our own and we repeat the process. But then as we get towards the end of our life, we become dependent again. And this is that whole process of becoming dependent again is very disturbing for most people. We, again, our whole life, and we heard from our parents, and we have strived to be independent. Think about when you got your driver's license and you were able to drive the car or got your first car, the sense of freedom. Now think about for aging folks, and they no longer can drive. They have their license taken away from them. So that sense of independence, again, can be very debilitating for a lot of people. We also talk about the journey of aging as being continuous, but also having stages. And for this, again, we're talking about many stage theorists we talk about, and you might be familiar with Erickson or Vygotsky. We talk about stages being, going through development as a child, getting independent as we get into young adulthood. So we have different stages when we go to school, when we start a family, and so forth. So we have different stages that we progress through life. But our journey of aging is also continuous. Even though those stages may not be very delineated in terms of stopping one today and starting a new one tomorrow. So they kind of blend into one another as well. And we also look at age from the following factors. We have chronological age, we have biological age, we have psychological age, social age, and our functional age. So chronologically, we have very delineated markers. 16 being able to drive, 21 being able to drink, 18 being able to be considered an adult to go into the Army or marry in most states. So those are our chronological markers. Our biological markers are very different. We become adults much earlier than we do from a psychological or chronological age period in terms of puberty. So from biological perspective, we are adults at 11, 12, 13 years of age. No one in our society today considers a 13-year-old as an adult. But biologically, we are. And it's the same thing at the end of life. So chronologically, we may have, in our society, we consider aging being usually around between 62 and 65. We enter old age. That is a totally arbitrary number. The only reason that we think about that is because that's when we start to think about retirement because of Social Security. So our definition of aging is really from a social perspective in terms of our chronological aging. Biologically, we can have people in our 60s who are very impaired, or even in the 50s, depending upon any kind of physical element. But we may have people who are in their 80s, 90s, even centenarians who are still physically active and many years biologically younger than their chronological age. Our psychological age, we've all met people who should be adults but do not act like adults. Our social age, how we interact with people, and then our functional age is where we are at and where we're functioning. So again, you can have someone who is very old chronologically, but their functional age may be much younger, and vice versa. We have two types of aging. We have primary aging, which is gradual, shared, the inevitable gains and declines that begin in adulthood and continue over the lifespan. So those are the things when we talked about, and someone mentioned gray hair, getting arthritis, wrinkles, those are primary aging characteristics. Secondary aging are products of our environment, so our health habits. If your health habits have been bad, if you have smoked, you are going to get into your 50s and be pretty wrinkled, which is not maybe a result of that primary aging, but a result of what you have done through your life processes. Disease processes are secondary aging kinds of things. And the secondary types of aging are not going to be shared by everyone and are not inevitable, whereas primary aging aspects, usually everyone shares those. Everyone gets gray hair at some point. Everyone gets wrinkled at some point. We now do things to combat that, but everybody shares those characteristics, whereas secondary is more really how you've lived your life and environmental factors.
Janet, you might be able to share your screen now, because it went to the main back to the main screen and went off of screen sharing. So it might allow you to pull the PowerPoint back up. I'm not sure.
Okay. It's allowing me to join the meeting again. So, yep, it's telling me I'm a presenter. Okay. Should say normal changes.
It's starting the screen sharing.
Okay, great. Thank you for letting me know that. That's annoying when people could not see that. So quickly, going through some normal changes that we go through. Our eyesight, usually we have some peripheral vision that decreases. We know that we usually have to wear bifocals or have contact lenses or go for surgery now that corrects our eyesight. We have decreased clarity of colors, pastels, and blues. Our hearing may change. We usually notice this in men more than in women, but usually as we progress through the lifespan, and this is why you may go into someone's apartment and their television is up very high, because that hearing loss is usually a natural part of aging and not being able to distinguish sounds from the background noises. Taste is another area not usually talked about, but we have a decrease in our taste buds and saliva. This is when you work with the elderly, especially those that are impaired, you kind of watch for this, because think about having a bad cold, and if you have problems with the ability to taste and also to smell, you don't feel like eating, that usually you smell something good and you want to eat, or you taste something, it makes you salivate and you get hungry. So for the elderly, when those things diminish, we're going to have diminished ability for appropriate nutrition. So we try to compensate with different flavors, maybe increased kinds of flavors, not necessarily salt, because that's going to cause some other issues, but we want to provide a variety of different flavors so that we can encourage people to eat at that time. We have some arteries, there may be some stiffening, arteriosclerosis, hardening of the arteries as we age as well. Bladder, we have increased frequency in urination. For those of us who have to get up in the middle of the night, we know that that happens. We have body fat that increases until middle age, then usually stabilizes and then decreases. So this is what I was talking about before, that we need to watch out for is a rapid loss in weight for the elderly. That's not a good thing. Somewhere around the age of 35, our bones start to lose minerals faster than they're replaced, and this is the primary cause of osteoporosis, so we need to start looking at that. Our brain loses some of the structures that connect nerve cells, and there's some functioning of the cells themselves that's diminished, and this may be, we talk about senior moments. This may be part of the cause for that. I also think what happens, and I have to caution everyone here, there's so much we don't know about brain and brain functioning. when I first started out in my career and I worked with folks who had mental retardation, we did not think at that time that neurons regenerated. We do know that they do that now, and we do know that even into old age we can generate new neural pathways. Some of those senior moments may be a lack of attention or sometimes overload, and that's what I blame at least my senior moments on at this point in my life. Our heart muscles, the muscle actually thickens with age, and our maximum pumping rate and the body's ability to extract oxygen diminish with age. Interestingly enough, our muscles, heart, and bones, if we keep moving and do exercise as we age, then we can mitigate a lot of the normal aging process. Our kidneys shrink and become less efficient, hence the increased urination as well. We're going to be running out of time shortly, so I'm going to go really quickly through these. Lungs, somewhere around age 20, our lung tissue begins to lose its elasticity, and the rib cage muscles shrink progressively, so our breathing capacity decreases. Again, here, if you do exercise, you can maintain lung functioning. We all know that as we get older, our metabolism changes, so what you were able to eat and consume when you were 20 and not gain any weight is not going to be the same when you become 30, 40, 50, and beyond. Our reflexes also slow down, and this is an issue for the elderly in terms of driving, although there's some compensation for that in terms of just having driven for a long period of time. And what we also know, kind of as a side note, is that if people continue to go through driver's education, a refresher course, that their driving abilities do increase as well as they age. We have muscle mass decline, especially when there's a lack of exercise. So even studies have been done, even on 80-year-olds and people close to 90, if you get them moving and going, we actually can reverse some of that muscle mass decline. Skin, our nails grow more slowly, your skin becomes dry and wrinkled. You also heal more slowly, and that's probably the most important thing that we need to watch out for in the elderly, especially if we have any kinds of diabetic issues. Our sexual health, after women go through menopause, we have vaginal lubrication decreases, sexual tissues atrophy. In men, we have decreased sperm production. So usually when I go through all of these different types of things with my young students, it doesn't look like aging is such a fun thing to do. What I remind them is not everyone goes through them all, and again, how you live your life when you are younger will impact what happens when you become elderly as well. Abnormal aging, and that's really kind of what we want to look at when we're working with any of the aging folks. We want to look at what kinds of disease processes there might be, any kind of cognitive changes, incontinence, dementia, mental illness, depression, especially here, kind of a caution. As people lose friends, relatives, spouses, there is normal grief process, and then there's abnormal grief process. So normal grief process, and again, the grief process is different in everyone, but if you have someone 6 months to a year, not that they still won't have periods of crying or grief, but if they are really incapacitated, then we need to look at some interventions in terms of that clinical depression. Excuse me. And also, extreme pain might be another part of abnormal aging. So even though we may have some losses in arthritis, we want to be able to function without a lot of pain. All right. Moving on into the strengths perspective. This is from a social worker. One thing that is really impressed upon if you go through a social work education, it's a way of looking or assessing at individuals from a positive rather than a deficit perspective. Especially working with the aging, what I have found is sometimes it's very hard to see the positive. But these folks have lived a long time. They have adapted. They have been successful in their aging process, and I think that's really important for us to remember and not just look at the things that they can't do anymore. So it's really holistic rather than diagnostic. We want to look at people as having something to offer, no matter what age they are or what functioning ability they are. And it's looking at coping strategies, motivations, and the potential for change. So everyone has positives, and we're not just a compilation of all the negative things that have happened to us or who we are. We want to look, when we talk about the strengths perspective, as assisting the person in dealing with life's challenges. It's the idea that people are resilient. When I talk to students, we talk about younger children. You can have two people who have the same issues and problems, and one will come out the other side of that being strong and capable, and the other person may not. And that's the whole concept of resiliency. And for my idea of it, in working not only with students, but when I was in practice and running programs and working with staff, is the one thing we have to remember: if people get into their 70s, 80s, 90s, they've been doing something right for all of those years. They have been resilient, because we don't get out of this life without all of us having problems and issues. And so we have to look at how they've been able to handle their life and the resiliency that they have, and now we can use it to help them as they get towards the end of their life. So we're asking the person basically not only what's wrong, but what's right. We're looking in to see what's right with that person, what they can do. So quickly, do you have any ideas on what a strength can be, looking at the people that you've worked with?
Social relationships.
Right? I think I saw one, because sometimes I get the little things. Good health. Yes, good health, social relationships, compassion. Again, sometimes we have to let people know what we see as their positive and what their strengths are. Coping strategies, absolutely. Having a caring family. I'm getting little blocks up here, Alicia, so I can see that. Those are all positive strengths. Optimism. Very important for people. If you can look, in lots of research done in that area, optimists do better as they age than pessimists. No big surprise there. When we look at and see the glass as half full rather than half empty, we're able to really compensate. A sense of humor, activities, all of them are really good. And those are the kinds of things that you want to identify in your work with the folks that are living in your residencies. So we want to find out how they have coped in the past with abuse. Maybe they've had illness. Maybe there's been trouble in their life. And how did they cope with that in the past? What personal qualities that have they drawn on? What kind of talents do they have? How did they recover from misfortune, drug and alcohol use, or mental illness in the past? And again, that's spirituality. And for the elderly population, that may change as we move down the line, because overall we might be, well, at least less religious, but not maybe less spiritual. But how does their spirituality play into helping them cope with life's issues and problems? That's where it would really come up here. Okay, so how do you find those? You look for evidence of interests, talents, competencies. You can ask questions, and that may sound too simple, just asking people, what do you think your strengths are? But that's where I always start with folks. Sometimes it's hard for people to identify. We're really good at identifying what our weaknesses are, but it's very hard for people to talk about their strengths. So I would usually say to people, so if your family or your friend is describing you, what would they say about you? What would they say their strengths are? And sometimes taking it out into a third person helps people to say, well, I think my friends would say that I'm a good listener, that I cook well, whatever that is, to help them identify not just what their weaknesses are, because we really look at that maybe too much, but also then what have we brought along with our life? What are the positive things that we work with? So you want to ask your residents to discover what their strengths are. You can ask survival questions. So how have you managed to survive or thrive? Or how have you managed to live to this age that you are? You know, certainly you may have suffered a lot of issues and problems through your life. Tell me about that. How did you get beyond it? And you'll find out then about their survival skills. Well, I really relied on God. I believe, you know, prayer helped me. My family helped me. I've always looked at things positively. So you want to help them identify what their positive strengths are, because we can use those now. We can draw on those even in later life. You want to ask support questions. Who in your life provides support to you? What is your life like when things are good or going well? So again, trying to get people to look at things from the other side and not just concentrate on the deficits that they may be going through right now. Possibility questions. What do you want or what do you need to be happy? Esteem questions. When people talk about you in a positive way, what do they say? And that goes back to helping them identify some of those strengths that they might not be able to help identify as easily. Perspective questions. Ask the person to explain their current situation. One of the things that we have to be very careful about when we work with the elderly is we can't infantilize them. We can't make them into children again. And I think we have the propensity to do that in the professional world. I always cringe when I hear people who work with the elderly on a professional level talk about them being just like children. Although there may be some similarities, I think that takes away from the person's dignity and the respect that we need to have for those folks that they have gotten to that advanced age. And I always ask the question of myself, how do I want to be described? How do I want to be treated? So I think it's important for us to remember that as we work with the elderly. Ask them. Make them an active participant. Unless there is some kind of cognitive or mental health issue, we want people to have control over their lives. We want them to feel that they have the ability to make choices. We all want that as reasonable adults. There's no reason that they don't want that as well. And we also want to ask them, what would you change if you could? Many times they'll say, well, I'd like to be younger. Wouldn't we all? But what would they change in their life if they were able to do anything at all?
I just want to let you know Jenna, we lost the slides again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not giving me anything. Apologize again. Don't know what's happening with this. I think I'm just going to continue on. We're almost getting towards the end. Is that okay with you, Alicia? Because I can't seem to pull them up again.
No, that's good.
Okay. Hopefully, if it seems like it comes back or there's something else, let me know. Okay. Additional questions that you can ask folks. Who is important in your life? This would provide social support kinds of information. What do you do during a normal day? Looking at their normal activities. What makes life worth living for you? And this is life satisfaction questions. What has worked well for you in the past? And that would be looking at coping skills. What is going well for you right now? And that's looking at present-oriented strengths. So, you know, everyone has things that are going not so well in their life, but what's going well for them at that particular time? And then again, if things could be different, what would you wish for? And that's kind of the visioning questions when we look at assessing someone from a strengths perspective. So going back to Mary, what we would ask for Mary are, what are some of the strengths that we can say that Mary has developed? She's functioning, capable of maintaining herself in her environment, as far as we know at this point. She's lived to be 82 and has developed coping strategies. She's developed relationships and friendships. Can you think of any other things that may be Mary's strengths at this particular point? And while you're thinking of that, I'll see if I can get the screen back up again. Any thoughts? Alicia?
Thoughts? Socializing.
Socializing, okay, good.
I think it usually takes one person and then they all come.
Yeah.
Helping others.
Helping others, good. That might be a really big strength, and that's a very good thing to talk to someone about, especially if someone feels they have no self-worth, to be able to see themselves through someone else's eyes and say, well, gee, you really helped me, or you helped Mrs. Smith, or whatever. It gives us a sense of self-worth. Okay, anything else?
I'm not quite sure I understand, but one of our, volunteering within the building. And then I have a person who said, her faith. And folks lose a fair amount of independence that drives a good deal of behavior, providing an ability to make a choice or to provide input.
Okay, so basically, if I hear that correctly, it's talking about, being able to still make decisions for yourself and being as independent as that person can be. Is that your take on it, Alicia?
I believe so.
Okay, good. So we can look at and see what kinds of strengths that Mary had. So kind of to recap some of these things, the first thing that we kind of need to do, and I've talked about that earlier, in order to be able to assess the folks that you're working with, is build rapport. Start building relationships early. Get to know people as they're moving into your complexes. Get to know what's normal for them. Don't wait until there are issues, because it's easier to see small changes if you know the person well. When I would go out, when I was an aging caseworker, doing protective services or monitoring when I became the supervisor, it's hard for us. We'd have to do background with friends and family, neighbors. Neighbors were good. Well, gee, Mary was able to do this for a long period of time, and then she started not to be able to go to the store. So we'd get the small changes for them. But you have a unique opportunity in that you are seeing these people almost every day. So what's going on in their life right now? And sometimes if we can see small changes, we can intervene early on and not wait for some kind of big catastrophe to happen. Developing good listening skills, I think, is really important. Again, this goes back to the strengths perspective, and it's just common giving people dignity, common courtesy and dignity is actually listening to what they have to say. Part of what I train students in is narrative therapy. It's listening to how people describe their situation and their life. And then you hear the subtle nuances of when there's any changes that go on. You don't want to grill people. Again, that's why I was cautioning using the mini mental exam, because it can seem like a test. No one likes to take tests, and there might feel like if I can't answer all of these questions, then something bad's going to happen. I'm not going to be able to stay in my apartment. So that's very anxiety producing. So when you're talking to people, and I'm sure most of you are doing this anyway, be patient. Be calm when you're questioning. Don't insist or accuse. If they can't answer something right away, say, well, get back to me on that. Allow them the opportunity to think before you move on to the next question. Also ask them what they need. Again, we tend not to do this with the elderly. We tend to treat them as small children. We're their parents. We're going to tell you what you need. But go back to them and ask, what do you need to be able to stay here? What do you need to help make your life easier? And listen to what they have to say with that. Maintaining the dignity of the individual. And again, for me, I really cannot stress this enough. This is something that I have worked on my entire career. And again, why I really hate when people make those comparisons with aging adults with children, because they are not children and they deserve our respect. Maintaining autonomy, letting people make their choices. Again, lots of research done, even for people who go into assisted living or nursing facility. If they can make as many choices throughout the day as possible, what time they get up, what they have to eat for meals, what they're going to wear, even something as simple as that, their adjustment into those facilities is much better than if they are told what they're going to wear, what they're going to eat, what they're going to do. So having autonomy, being able to make choices. Maintaining as much independence as possible. That's also another very major part of building rapport. And then for us, we need to be warm. You need to be genuine when you work with people. And you need to let them know that you are empathetic to what's happening with them, that you are there to help them. So, kind of getting down to the nitty-gritty, what do you do and where do you go for help? And most of you are going to know this already, but when there is doubt, always err on the side of caution. If you, again, going back to one of those first slides that you were able to see, if you feel that there is immediate danger, you need to take immediate steps. Calling the local area agency on aging, and call them, even if you're not sure whether intervention is necessary. They'll probably send someone out, and maybe they'll come back to you and say, nope, everything is fine, or we're just going to get some services in, but always use them as your local resource. Remember, and this is important, unless the aging person is incompetent, they can refuse services. Now, within your facilities, your buildings, there might be certain rules and regulations, I'm sure, in terms of cleanliness and what they can and can't do. But as long as they're not breaking any of your rules, we have to, again, that goes back to autonomy, that they may not want to get Meals on Wheels. You may think that's the best thing for them, but they don't really want to do that. So you have to respect their decision-making as well. Continue to monitor. You know, you may not be able to do something right then, but continue to monitor that person and be quick then as they continue to decline to get back to those resources and to let them know when things are not working well for that person. Use your own talents. You know, if you've been 20, 30 years in this field, you have developed a multitude of talents working with folks. And a lot of what I probably have told you today is, yeah, I already know that. Use your talents to be able to assess and then work on what's going to happen next for folks. That's it. And I'll be happy to take any questions you might have right now. And since you can't see the slide, you can't see my contact information, but we'll get the slides and all of that to Alicia, and she'll be able to probably send that out to you. Is that correct, Alicia?